Here on the Alive and Social Network, it's the inaugural show. It's episode number 1 of the show that has no name, but we can give you an idea of what's going to happen during the course of the next hour with our temporary name, Bob Harvey. My name is Brian Turner. You can call me BT. There's my co-host, Bob Harvey. Say hello, Bob.
Hello out there. How are you?
In podcast land. Bob, here's the temporary title, The Landscape and Gardening Show with Bob and BT. That kind of spells it out there.
That's a great starting point.
Not bad at all. Sort of a foundation. It explains what we're up to here, what's going to happen during the course of these hour-long podcasts every week on the Alive and Social Network. But I think we need something with a little more pizzazz.
Sure, it'll grow from there, if you will.
Should we share, no pun intended? Wah, wah, wah. You're branching off into a whole new category now. Wah, wah, wah. Here's some of the names we came up with at a little idea jam the other day. So let's throw these out there just for the sake of argument, because we're going to ask for your feedback. You can send Bob an email or myself an email, and we'll put those out there in just a bit. But we want some feedback, some show idea, name ideas, and actually show topic ideas. Anytime you've got something that you'd like us to discuss on the show, let us know via email, and we'll get right back to you and get these things worked in. Some of the name ideas: outward appearances. That wasn't bad.
Not bad at all. Not bad.
Inside, outside. That was pretty good.
That's really good because we're gonna tangent off into so many things that are related to the landscape on the outside, having a lot to influence in what we do on the inside, mainly in the kitchen.
Inside, outside, not bad. By the way, there was a third voice you might have heard there. That was Eric Melby. Let's say hi to Eric Melby. We have special guests on the show every week. Eric's from Meridian Tree. Good to see you, Eric.
Good to be here.
Good to have you here indeed. So Eric will be chiming in during the course of the show and contributing here, especially in the realm of trees, because that's his thing, trees and shrubs. And he's got some turf experience, too. So good to have you here once again in the Alive and Social Studios. We got living landscapes on our list, on our hit list. That was pretty good. I like that. I like all of these.
I do, too.
From seed to feed, that was kind of cool. It seemed a little more farm-oriented. In the idea jam when we had our brainstorm, but it's still not bad. You got any over there that I'm missing?
Well, the step up from that would be something along the lines of design, then dine.
Design, then dine. Well, that sounds a little foofy, doesn't it?
So we can play with that a little bit. That's a little more...
Because it's the whole idea of getting your design together, getting your garden together, and then going outside and enjoying the space.
Yeah. Outside design and dine.
Outside design and dine. Okay, we got a couple of other ideas there. Bob, what is your email address? Let's put that out there right away, because I mentioned folks can reach out with ideas.
Edelweissdesign.com, EDELWEISS design.com. This is a very special anniversary year for the whole story that song is part of.
We're going to get to that in just a second.
Right, so it's easy to remember the name.
I'll put mine out there. It's btvoice@gmail.com. BEETEA, like a cup of BT. I don't know what that means other than those are my initials, and I just made a funny thing happen with it.
Black tea?
BT Voice. A yellow and black, apparently. btvoice@gmail.com. So send along your ideas for the soon-to-be renamed, we would hope soon-to-be renamed, Landscape and Gardening Show with Bob and BT here on the Alive and Social Network. Let's dive into that real quick. I want to give our listeners a little background about Bob Harvey and Edelweiss Design and the name itself and the inspiration for the name. So this goes back to how do you solve a problem like Maria von Trapp herself. So give us some background, give us some backstory on you and the late Maria von Trapp and your history together, and how that brings us to Edelweiss.
Well, I hail here 30 years ago from New England, from Vermont. And in Vermont, the town of Stowe is where the Von Trapp, the real Von Trapp family that the movie was written about, resided after they came over from Europe.
Now, when did they arrive from Europe? I mean, we know, if you know the Sound of Music story, which the movie celebrates its 50th anniversary this year. And they escaped the Nazis, and then the story kind of stops there in the movie. So can you give us a little bit of their history that followed
at that time of the war? They ended in New York and then headed up the Hudson Valley and into Vermont and bought an abandoned farmhouse settlement on some acreage and started a kind of a music camp thing. And you should go to their website. They have Stowe, Vermont has the Von Trapp Family Lodge, and on that site they do talk about their history in more detail. There's a couple books too that you can read about, and of course the latest media did a real expansion on the story, and it was really exciting because I was part of some of that for a short time. My first job outside of college, my undergrad, was working for the Von Trapps. So
what did you do? What was the gig?
Well, you name it, I did if it was outside. And they were looking for a professional gardener caretaker. And the youngest son, part of the rest of the story is there were 3 more children after the movie line story.
Oh, they had more than
Yes,
okay.
3 more. And the youngest is Johannes.
Oh, and these would have been children that Baron Von Trapp and Maria then had together. Okay,
after,
so the 3 then had a bunch of older half sibs, and then
Exactly.
there's the 3 that they were sibs. Okay,
Right. And so the youngest son ended up, over the years, becoming basically the president or CEO or the person in charge of the lodge complex and
Sort of like-
developed into basically a very, very nice resort area.
like Von Trapp Inc. I mean, he
Right.
was the guy running it. Okay,
So Trapp Family Lodge in
There you go.
Stowe, you go to that website and you will get all the... I highly recommend a visit there, especially in the fall. It's pretty breathtaking. It has a lot of sentiment to the Austrian experience that they had.
now was their move to Stowe based more on just serendipity, or did they move to the Vermont area because it reminded Mom Maria of parts of Austria, or was there any of that sort of attachment to the landscape there, or anything like that?
You know, I can't answer that for sure, but I gleaned from my experience working with them that it was something that the topography and the environment, for those of us who have lived or spent time in Vermont or visited, there's something about it that you take away with you.
Eric Melby, you're shaking your head. Have you spent some time in that part of the world? Yeah.
I'm from the East Coast.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
Okay.
Grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and spent a lot of time up and down the coast.
Okay, so you would echo those sentiments about the landscape and just the vibe and the energy and the emotion that landscape, or any landscape for that matter, but in particular the one we're talking about, that can evoke in people.
Lots of sugar maples.
Yeah.
So you get beautiful color.
Yeah.
It really had a lot of influence on the direction that I took in my profession. So having an experience like that, first time out of school, my first official type of employment being the gardener / caretaker of this several 100-acre estate, of which about a total of maybe 2 to 3 acres were landscaped to some degree.
And
around
was your undergrad degree in what you're pursuing?
environmental
what you do
studies,
now? Okay. Yeah.
and Bachelor of Arts with an environmental studies concentration. So the other little connection was Johannes, the youngest son, actually was an alum from the college that I went to. So he posted the ad. My advisor came to me and said, "Bob,
I think we got a job
I think we got
for you.
something for you. I don't know if med school is really the direction you want to go."
And
but
were you thinking about? You obviously were thinking about that.
I started
okay.
in pre-med, and then I was just transitioning over at the end of my junior year more into the environmental studies, and that's when my advisor said, "I think this would be a really good fit." Part of my financing for my education what came from landscaping the campus.
Oh wow!
So
you were hired there
yes,
as a part of what was
yes,
going on
exactly.
too.
So then I got to basically work in this very high-profile setting where margins of error were kept to a minimum. The standards are very high. They were a European, Germanic kind of standard that I was drawn to because it really helped to show off the best of the best in terms of the horticultural and landscape and natural environments. So it was pretty exciting. It is one of those so-called dream jobs or experiences that everybody would like to have an opportunity to have something that they could call that, and this was it for me.
For you, yeah, young 22-year-old Bob Harvey. It's funny you bring up the precision, that sort of Austrian Germanic precision that comes from those cultures. And when you watch the dancing scenes and the singing scenes in The Sound of Music, when they're dancing in the gardens in Salzburg, you can, and we visited those as a family as well. My family's been over there. You can see that level of precision in the layout of the gardens and just how everything's meticulous and perfect down to an inch, down to a half inch, if you will, in terms of the plantings and the areas, everything about it.
It's in a very emotive landscape, and it keeps you on your toes. So for me, from a horticultural experience, it set the bar very high. And then through the course of the years, I was there for a season or two, and there was the tragic loss of the lodge in the big fire.
I remember that story.
And I was there that night. I sat next to Maria while the lodge burned. It was an amazing hit emotionally for the family. There was obviously the financial concerns and so forth, but I knew they would rebound. They're very, very resourceful, and it would become a success once again, as it has. But the emotional toll was very high for Maria herself.
I could imagine the mementos and just, well, let alone the time spent in that structure and
Yes.
sort of the emotion and life that you build around any home. For her, it had to be especially poignant.
Yes, it was watching her struggle and try to recover from that. But she's a pretty tough lady. But it was like a missing piece of the puzzle.
Now, I imagine you interfaced with Johannes a lot because he was the boss. But Maria, she's the matriarch. She's the mama. And she displayed that. I think Julie Andrews showed, what that was all about in the movie. And I think if folks have done any reading or any research about Maria von Trapp and the family, she was a strong, strong woman. I bet that was a really unique experience to be around her.
Actually, I spent more time with her than I did
You
with
did?
Johannes.
Okay.
Johannes was involved in the overall operations of many, many things going on simultaneously. And if things were going well in our department, we didn't hear much from him, which was good news. Maria was very attached to the experience of being in the gardens. We farmed a 1.5, almost 2 acre cut flower and vegetable garden on site. So we generated things for the kitchen. We generated things for display inside the lodge in terms of cut flowers and roses and all the kinds of things. And always looking for the latest and greatest. And
enough for autumn canning, too? I mean, would that happen in the
there
kitchen,
would be
that sort of
some
thing?
of that, more from a sentiment standpoint than an actual. We could never provide what the kitchen needed, but we could offset,
Sure.
for specials and things like that. And we, as staff, were taken care of very well and fed well, and there was a camaraderie. I'm still in touch with several of the folks that I worked with. That's, we're looking at over 35 years ago.
Yeah.
So
What a very special time for you, Bob.
yes, so
An
it carried
amazing
through.
time.
And I came upon the term landscape architecture, never heard of it. We do not have that program at the university in Vermont, but decided to pursue it. I had a lot of friend connections out here in the Twin Cities, came out for a visit. Long story short, went to the university for landscape architecture, decided to start my own company and design build and take that horticultural experience and formalize it from a design and more of a comprehensive, holistic approach, so that we're looking big picture on the macro level down to the micro level and moving back and forth seamlessly between that process. And that's what we will find on these podcasts is that we're going to do that a lot. We're going to move from the macro to the micro. We don't want to be hung up on either one because they both need each other, because that will prevent a lot of do-overs and mistakes and loss of money, because some things were not thoroughly considered and thought through and planned as part of the big scheme.
Well, it's funny you bring it up in that sense, too, because your eyes lit up as we were going through some of the names that we had thought of for the show and just the brainstorming session we had. And when Inside Outside came up, you tagged on that right away, because that's really what this is about. I think folks think that gardening and landscaping on the surface is only about outside. But really, it is about what happens in that space between inside and outside. The threshold is only one phase of that. It's all one big organic whole. Your home inside and your home outside are one entity.
And there's so many different applications of landscape architecture across the profession, with overlaps in architecture, in landscape construction, in horticulture, that where we find our niche most gratifying is in the design build sector, mostly in the private sector, but we do work with commercial entities. And in all those cases, our mission, our goal is to be involved on the front end of a process or a project. So when someone is looking to, even if they're just remodeling or they're building from the ground up, brand new project, we want to be working with the architect and the builder on the front end to make lots of considerations. Okay, you want to add a sunroom over here. Have you considered the sun angles at the different times of the year? How about access? How about drainage? What's the soil conditions? Where are we going to direct circulation on the outside after this is constructed, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of background that goes in, planning extensively before any action takes place.
Sure.
Is the way to approach it, and sometimes it's hard to see the merit in that to the degree that it's done, but if it's done well, then you save on the other end.
Sure enough. Well, you don't just build a house. You come up with a plan to build a house.
I always akin it that we're not there to put the piping on the icing in the cake. We're there to help put the ingredients in the cake.
We're here to bake
We're
the
here
cake.
to get that cake.
We're
and
baking the cake.
And it becomes a process that you get two things done. You get the communication aspect started at the very beginning, and it carries through the process. But you also build the rapport and the understanding with the clients, be them on a private level or even on a commercial level.
You got to know how they live and how they behave and what's important to them.
Yes, the expectations then are aligned,
Mm-hmm.
and I think you can never really over communicate.
Yeah,
It's usually the other situation. So anyway, that's what brought me to Minnesota. Been in business for almost 30 years and have enjoyed all the different chapters that have come with it. And can't do it alone. Have wonderful staff, a very collaborative approach, and it's
It's a joy to do, isn't it? It's
and
a
Minnesota,
joy to do.
Minnesota likes to keep throwing curveballs.
Yeah.
And we just decide how we're going to respond to them, and creating that template of what we experienced back at the Trapp Family Lodge in Vermont to what we see here in the Twin Cities and so forth became the challenge, became the journey of like, how can we replicate or reproduce some of those experiences that people were kind of looking for, but having different constraints, different elements to deal with, and yet still gets that same kind of satisfaction or gratification out of the final product.
You brought up the whole notion of everything needing a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's the layout of what we're going to do on the show today. To give our listeners a quick peek behind the curtain, we'll look at the springtime aspect of where we're at right now to begin things. Oh, it's real live podcasting here, so if the sound of gurgling water going into your glass happens there, Bob, let's not worry about it. I'm going to paint a little picture here with the Alive and Social studios that we're podcasting from right now, because it's a springtime day. We're doing this show on April 2nd. You may be listening to the podcast at another time, and that's great. We want you to do that and share these shows and listen to them at any time. But we'll paint a picture for you about today, this day in Minnesota. No curveballs today.
No.
We've got a 60-degree day outside. It's mostly sunny. It's a little bit windy. Let's call it breezy plus. And we've got one of the windows in the studio open. So if we hear maybe a Harley-Davidson motorcycle make its way past the front of the house, or
Barking dogs.
some barking dogs, or any number of sounds, or Bob's pouring water, or our engineer Lydia's pouring some water, Eric, no matter what happens here, it's just live podcasting, and it's all good.
We're in town.
We're in town. That's right.
These are the elements and the colors that complete the experience.
We see outside the windows here just some of those nice little buds coming out on the tree, some of those little furry buds, and we'll get into a little more of that with Eric Melby here. So we're going to take an inventory here of the show, and one of the first things we're going to talk about is doing that, taking an inventory of where you're at outside and inside and outside your home with your garden, with your landscape. We're going to talk about developing a plan so that you can come up with some kind of a game plan, or at least we'll plant the seed, again, pun intended, for you to do that on your own with some of the ideas that we'll put out there. We'll dive into a little more about trees and shrubs with our guest Eric Melby from Meridian Tree. We've got a little bit of lawn topic stuff to get into with you today, because here it's April 2nd. There are questions to be answered, or at least some ideas to be put out there in regard to the lawn. Everybody wants to know a little bit about the lawn this time of year. And then also, this is the time to spruce things up with containers and spring planters and really bring some fresh color and some vibrance to even just a small corner of your garden or living space right now. And it's so easy to do. And you can rotate things throughout the course of the season. But right now, and you're seeing it happen at shops all across the area with those spring planters and some of the hanging baskets and such. It's just wonderful to see right now.
We're
that
blitzing
color coming
as we speak. We're blitzing.
That color coming at us and those beautiful smells coming at us. So let's begin with taking an inventory. Okay, so again, we're doing the show April 2nd, but you can take an inventory on your space at any time. But let's talk about an inventory of where we're at with springtime right here, right now. What do you think the first place and the first thing to do is, Bob? I mean, when it comes to that, and you're looking out at that at that landscape, there's dog poop out there. There's lawn areas that are in bad shape. What do you think's number one here?
Well, obviously, what hits the visual is probably the first thing, and
the dog poop that I mentioned.
The dog poop doesn't go well with the smell of Easter lilies.
That's what I saw outside today. I did some picking up before our podcast today. I did.
Yeah, the sooner you get that stuff off, the better it'll be for your lawn. But assessing how was the winter? How did the landscape respond to the winter this year compared to the winter last year? That's probably one of the biggest differences that we have observed.
We had so little snow.
We had so little snow, and that translates into a moisture deficit.
Yeah.
So there's some real issues to deal with that, all pretty immediate. The previous winter, we had a lot of snow cover and a lot of protection. This winter, we didn't have any protection, so we saw, basically brown ground most of the winter and a lack of moisture. So not a lot in the soil. Plants are starting to wake up, particularly things with deep roots or not so deep roots, trees, small trees and shrubs and so forth. So they're starting to look for moisture in the ground, and guess what?
There isn't any there.
It isn't there. So when we get into the category of evergreens, particularly, last year, a lot of evergreens died, not because there wasn't any moisture. The moisture was there. It was locked up. It was in an ice block.
Because it was so cold. We had that polar vortex come through. Let's bring Eric in right away with some feedback on that. You saw that, I imagine, a whole lot. Did you do a fair amount of replacement too, Eric, when it came to springtime of last year?
Well, there was a combination of two things last year: cold, wind, and sun.
Yeah.
And people lost arborvitae, spruce trees, anything that's evergreen wicks moisture all winter long. So if it doesn't have that ability to wick it, or it does not have enough, it'll desiccate. And it usually happens towards spring. So something that's perfectly green all winter long, brown,
March,
it starts to
early
turn
April,
brown
March.
on them, and they're like, "What the heck happened?" They call us.
It was going great.
Yeah. Is it a disease? Is it a bug? What happened to my spruce? Well, it burned up. And this year, knock on wood, we have not seen as much occurring in our landscapes that we tend to.
Now, you mentioned the wind and the sun factor as related, again, to last year. But this is something on a go-forward basis that I want to bring up. Can you wrap some of those smaller ones? I see that burlap wrapping and things like that, and I've done some of that. Is that,
that works.
a good thing to do?
There's a couple, you'll see it, especially in an area near a road. You're going to get salts and things blowing in there. The wrapping works. It's just it's a little bit expensive. It's time consuming, and it is not very aesthetic. So if you have a real pretty evergreen in front of your house and you got a big burlap sack over them, it's. But if you want to try and preserve them, that's one of the best ways.
Sure.
There are some anti-desiccant sprays, but they work sometimes and they don't others.
They were. On that subject of antidesiccant, and for those who may not understand what an antidesiccant is, it's a product that has, from what I understand, almost like a paraffin-based product in it, like a wax almost.
Sure.
It's a sealant.
So it's coating.
So it coats the openings or the stomatas
needles,
of the needles, where all that moisture escapes into the sky because the sun is out and it's wanting to transpire. So it helps to seal those openings off. It does wear off over time with precipitation and that kind of thing, and just breaking down. So in a winter like this past winter, where we had the swings of warmer temperature, then it got cold.
Yep.
Those days it got up above freezing towards 40 or whatever, if it had been a month or two since your evergreens were sprayed with the antidesiccant, you go out and spray them again, and you were basically reinsuring, like Eric said, if you don't want to use the burlap. In some cases, we used both on plants that were even particularly vulnerable to damage. And that has a lot to do with location and those kinds of things. So in that assessment, that design process, we have to ask the question, did we make the right choice? And is it worth continuing with that choice? And then what are the alternatives?
All right.
So
Yews were hit really hard
Yes.
last year. And they're a little bit, for people that have yews out in their landscape, if the tips are brown and stuff, don't panic.
Right.
Let the buds do their thing, and then if it's still brown by the latter part of May, then snip that off. But
Okay.
don't rush right out.
Don't
with
jump
it.
too soon.
Yeah, with
All
the
right.
shears and start hacking away.
So the trees and shrubs, we got an inventory management that we still need to continue a thought thread on here. Do we start watering those rascals right now too? I mean, since you mentioned, Bob, water is such a key issue from this past winter that we have now. What do we do?
Well, in areas where the ground has thawed, especially on southern and western exposures, and one way to tell that the frost is gone far enough down, it disappeared, is if things are starting to shoot. Like
Okay.
if you have perennials or things like that, and you see bud swelling or greenery starting to flush, that's telling you that soil temperature is coming up. So you could start, especially with evergreens, putting a little bit of moisture on them. Now, we had a little bit of moisture yesterday with the thunderstorms that blew through. Some areas were graced with more than others. But again, it's a visual thing. You look and you see, what does the soil moisture look like? Stick your finger down in there 2 or 3 inches, and if it's really if it's sticking together a little bit, there's good moisture there. So you don't need to flood the plants. But as soon as we start to see that dry, dusty look on the surface and starting to edge its way down, I would put some moisture. And I also, when I water evergreens, I'll spray the whole thing. Not just the roots, but I'll put some moisture in up and around the needles. And it's not just evergreens, but other plants as well.
I think they all appreciate that.
Yeah.
If you planted last year, if your trees went in last fall, I'd be watering this spring.
Yes.
Especially those new plantings.
A
Okay.
25-foot tall spruce tree is going to be fine right now. But if you have 6 or 8 foot spruce or evergreens of some type that went in, I would be watering them.
Or any kind of tree, not
Yeah.
just the evergreens, but
No,
especially the ones,
the deciduous.
especially the evergreens. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
Their demands won't be as great yet as the
Yeah,
evergreen.
they wicked all, like we said, they wicked all winter long, so they're looking for it.
See, the difference is those evergreen needles are working all the time, 12
Yeah.
months a year.
Yeah.
The deciduous plants do not produce leaves yet that will be doing that, so you get a little more lead time.
I think that may be some new knowledge for some of our podcast listeners here. Just remember that as far as it relates to those trees, those evergreen trees, that they're working all winter long, even though the roots are frozen, even though they appear to be just in a dormant mode. No, they're constantly working. Like you said, those needles want to respirate. So you got to do something to help them along, especially if winter comes around. Let's continue taking an inventory of what's going on in that landscape. So we got some trees and shrub action behind us. Do we want to start cutting anything right now? Is it still time to cut things?
Sure.
Or should we be cautious about it, or what?
Let's talk on 2 levels with
Okay.
that. One would be what we call the woody sector, which would be your trees and shrubs and evergreens. And then the other would be herbaceous. And in herbaceous, we're talking our perennials, things that die all the way back to the ground and then come up again. So if we're doing starting a little general cleanup, light cleanup, and I'll just start with the flower beds per se, not the lawn. I'm going to let Eric talk about the lawn. Is removing that debris now is a really good idea with the dead hosta leaves and astilbes or whatever comes to mind. Getting that foliage out of the beds and removing it is a good idea. If it's dry enough for you to step in without getting mud on your shoes, literally stuck like cement, then you can do that.
Now, if you got some of those, let's use hostas as an example, in an area that's really shady and kind of wet, can you trim those wet leaves off, those old wet, or like
Sure.
you said, or do you want them to
Actually,
be
they'll
dry?
just pull off.
They'll just pull
They'll
off.
just pull off.
So you don't have
just
to worry
do the
about
finger
them. Yeah.
combing
Yeah.
thing, and
Okay.
you just start grabbing that stuff, and it opens the way for the things that are getting ready to sprout. It gives them the room and space that they need. Most of the nutritional benefit from the decomposition has already occurred by the springtime. And when we talk about how we maintain and take care of our investment, we'll talk about some of the things that we put back organically into those areas to ensure their growth throughout the season. So on an herbaceous level with perennials and this kind of thing, that with the pruning and the cleanup, I think Eric could speak to that on woodies.
Well, we're running up against a deadline of what we call dormant pruning. So sometime between October and April, you can prune trees that are normally done in the wintertime. Okay. Oaks, elms, birch, crab apples. If it flowers in the spring, it should be pruned in the winter. That deadline may be Monday, Tuesday.
Okay, because we're here April 2nd today. Yeah?
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, it's usually the first week in April's the cutoff, and you get a warm day like yesterday, and things, buds are really popping. The reason behind that is 1, insects, and 2, disease. So with oaks, there's a disease called oak wilt, and it can be fatal. So as a tree person, if we go out and prune your oak and it dies, you'd be pretty mad at us. So what? By
who's going to get the blame?
Yeah,
that's
by
right.
stopping this process, when we do, it allows the tree to heal its wound. It takes about 5 days for a tree to wall off a wound, and then it's about another 2 or 3 weeks before you really have any microbial activity that produces that fungus. So that gives us about a 3 to 4 week window of being safe.
Okay.
Elms, it's a disease also, Dutch elm disease. The crab apples and some of the flowering things, it's a fungus called fire blight that we're trying to avoid. So right now we're right there on the window. So if you think you're going to go out into your yard and start pruning away on your crab apples and things like that, get it done this weekend.
How about a birch, for instance?
Well, the birch is susceptible to bronze birch borer, and we're not going to prune birch anymore after this weekend.
Let it be done. Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So you open those wounds, you track the bug to your tree, and it's your lights out for that tree.
Eric, I have a couple instances where clients have asked if we've pruned some birches or maples at the appropriate time, and then as spring progresses, we see some weeping and some. So could you address that, because they seem to get alarmed?
Well, the house we were at today in Wayzata had cans attached to their maple trees. They're bleeding, they're weeping, and that person's making syrup out of it. So certain trees will bleed longer and more vigorously, and birch are you can cut a branch at this time of year and watch them drip, and it's not problematic.
Okay.
It's to the client, it can look bad, but it's part of the tree's process.
Now, I may have damaged my birch. I have a river birch next to my pond in my backyard, so I'm going to bring myself up as an example here, because some of those lower branches, as it was growing in, were just getting in the way, drooping down into the pond, into some of the planting areas, into the grass. I mean, that's what a birch does. And more than several times during the summer, I went out there and trimmed some of those branches. Might I have caused some damage? I mean, because I've got there's 3 branches, there's 3 trunks, stems on that tree, and one of those, up at the top, it's dead. So I've got to do something about that. Halfway up, it's not growing anymore.
River birch.
River birch, yeah. Might I have caused that damage or not? Or
I mean, I've been in the Twin Cities since 1994, and we've taken down 1 birch that died from bronze birch borers, or 1 river birch.
Birch.
So the river birch tend to be they're not as susceptible as the paper birch.
Okay.
So I doubt you did any damage to that.
Might it be that
could have been more root damage?
Okay, all right, because it is kind of bundled in there next to the pond and the retaining wall, and it's just there's not a lot of room for those roots to go out at that point. There's one pathway kind of down to where the lawn is, but otherwise, it's pretty hemmed in root wise. Absolutely, it's hemmed in. So maybe that was it.
Well, that's a possibility. It could have bent over in the snow and some damage happened to the tissue. There's lots of different lots of options on that.
Well, I'm just glad it wasn't my trimming and pruning. I'm just looking for a little bright spot there with my river
You can
birch.
finish this show guilt-free. Okay?
Well, we're not quite done yet, Bob. We're not quite done.
I would, but one back to the pruning thing, as far as shrubs and stuff go.
Yes.
Woody shrubs, yes, have at them, not too aggressively, but get it, thinning and cutting back. Evergreens, we tend to wait. I mean, if you wait till, let's say, late May, early June, your new growth is going to be halfway extended. You're going to shear them or you're going to cut them back, however, and then you're going to get your second half of your growth, and they'll stay tidy for you. If you go after them at this time of year, it's probably, then you're going to get the full growth. They're going to be shaggy again by June, and you're going to hit them again. So it's twice as much work.
In our approach with regards to the woodies, including the evergreen shrubs, is we have two categories. One would be if it's blooming in the spring, like you mentioned earlier, we're just finishing up our late winter, spring pruning on those things. And examples would be things that, if they're blooming in the spring, they were pruned last summer. So let's start with the things that are going to bloom this spring. We pruned those as soon as they bloomed the previous season. The examples of that would be the evergreens.
Okay.
They were done in May, June of last year. Lilacs.
Yes.
Okay. A real noticeable common situation. Anything in the prunus family, we have a lot of flowering shrubs in the cherry family that we use, and those all got pruned right after bloom with the lilacs. Things that are going to bloom in the summer, okay, like late June through August, September, would be examples like hydrangeas. Today, crews were out pruning hydrangeas, and depending on varieties, there's a whole multi-layered approach to all the different cultivars. But because they bloom in the summer, they could be done.
You can do that now.
Right now,
Okay.
this weekend, even through next weekend.
Forsythia?
Forsythia would be done. That's a spring bloomer, so
that's a
that
spring
would have
bloomer.
been done as soon as it finished blooming. So let's go forward from now. Forsythia blooms by the end of April. When it's finished blooming, then you can prune and shape it the way you want.
So like the lilacs there,
Right.
like you said. Yeah.
Right. So that's for pruning and shaping. On back to taking inventory and assessing, we do have shrubs that suffer a lot of damage in the wintertime. And those are things that are attracted to some of the animal population, like voles and moles and rabbits and deer. So there's several approaches for that. And people, obviously at this point, if they've done some protection measures, they probably know what they need to be doing and continue doing that. Those who've not done anything and are seeing damage, then we need to, in that assessment, identify the things that have been damaged. And then are they repairable or do we replace them? So that's that inventory.
And that's going to be a wait and see.
Yeah.
You have a perfectly healthy arborvitae, and then a section of it starts to turn brown. And you look down at the base, and you can see where a vole or a rabbit's chewed the bark off. And the bark is where the cambium layer is, nothing to feed that limb. So, if you see, especially on like euonymus, if you see extensive damage, they tend to come back. So I wouldn't get panicky and start ripping and tearing. I'd let them leaf out and see what happens.
In our later segments in the season, when we are starting to approach that fall section, we'll be talking about those protection measures and making plans for those so that those things are basically unaffected by the wrath of some of the animals.
If you see that whole cambium, is it cambium?
Cambium.
Cambium, that's right. Cambium layer, thank you. Chewed all the way around. You can pretty much be guaranteed that limb's not going to go, right? I mean, when that's like
Depends.
It's amazing.
okay, so
sometimes.
maybe not because
Yeah,
I had one out in the yard today as I was doing my taking inventory.
All right, we've seen crab apples that have been chewed by rabbits all the way around. Looks like a beaver had taken onto the tree, and they somehow had the fortitude to live through it. Now some die, obviously, but they can recover.
All right. So let it go. Let it go for a while. See what happens.
Now, you don't want to do that with a diseased tree or something like that. That's not going to gain you any popularity in the neighborhood. If you have somebody come out and assess a tree that's suffering from Dutch elm disease, that's something you want out.
All right. So you got to act on that a little bit sooner. So let's continue to take our inventory. Bob, what do you think we need to make sure is on the checklist? We've gone down the line here with some trees, with some shrubs. We've done some this, some of that, some pruning, some cutting.
It's obviously a great time to look at new ideas.
Okay.
So we look at our space, however big or small it may be, because our listening community stretches. Some people live on acreage. Other people have a 20 by 20 in the back. Other people have terraces or just little postage stamp areas where they're just looking for a opportunity for something green to gratify.
Yeah, just to make them feel good.
Exactly. And so there's something for everyone. And over the course of time, we hope to be able to hit on each one of those categories. But in taking the assessment, looking at some new ideas, we ask ourselves, what is it we want to do with the space? Has it been meeting our needs in terms of how we're using the space? Do we get our outside activities met? Let's identify what the activities are. We want to spend more time outside dining and grilling. Is the current scenario meeting our needs? I have a perfect example of my own family. I have 5 sons. 4 of them are teenagers. We're getting to the point where there's more friends coming over.
Sure.
They want gathering spaces, so outdoor fireplace, grill, pizza oven, all those kinds of things are very attractive to that chapter in a family's life. Also, some folks just want more of almost a sanctuary experience where they want it quiet and calm, more natural, looking at enjoying the landscape, not just during the daytime, but in the evening as well. So are there some lighting considerations? What can we make it look like in nightscape terms? Functions, does it function well for us? Is it meeting our needs in terms of access and maintenance? And is it at the right level of manageability? Is it more than we
That's
can
a really
handle?
important point right there.
Yeah.
The whole manageability of
Right.
it for you, if you're
Right.
even if you're a gardener.
Exactly, because unlike the things that are static inside our homes, once we do a kitchen or a dining room or whatever,
done.
it's done.
Yep.
It's static. Outside things are constantly changing. So being able to anticipate what those evolutions and changes are going to be in the landscape and be able to be ready and be proactive with them. So, and Eric can attest to that from a planting standpoint when we're doing forestry and planting and maintenance. What stays, what goes. When this tree's gone, do we have something we want to have coming up in its place? Is it a different species, and why? And what will it do for us? That kind of thing. We have a lot of edible landscapes. So we've found a tremendous upsurgence in landscapes that actually give back to us in terms of productivity and meet the needs of all the categories in wildlife.
Kitchen
Butterfly
herb gardens too.
Yes. Pollination for the bees and all that kind of thing. So, and then creating a time frame. We prioritize and say, here's the have-tos and here's the want-tos. And look at those in terms of a time frame and a cost. Is it something I'm going to do myself? Is it something where I need professional help? And can I stage it over a period of time? So some folks that we work with, really, there's some phenomenal do-it-yourselfers out there that really are it's like their second passion next to their profession, their other profession, and they just want some direction. So we'll consult and direct them and send them in the right direction in terms of where to get their materials and so, because we don't do retail, but we work with a lot of resources all over the Twin Cities.
And people like to get into it
Right.
and get their fingers dirty. I've got some quotes that I brought to the show today because it's springtime. I brought a few and I've got one in front of me right here from one of Canada's great living poets, Margaret Atwood. She's an environmental activist who has been for years. In the spring, at the end of the day, you should smell like dirt.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people that you work with that want that feeling.
I actually, I had been at client meetings most of the day, so I was dressed more for client meetings, but I was out doing a site visit and I just had to get my hands in the soil. I had my Felcos in my back pocket and working with some of the staff, and we had a great time. So I just got the dirt washed off my, see, it's still in my fingernails.
Yeah, you do got a little bit there. That's
here.
Good.
So, but there is that scent, that
Eric's
smell
like,
that comes from
dirt, that ain't nothing. Look at these paws right here. I'll show you some dirt.
So, and then getting excited about the planting prospects and a time frame and like I say, rather than just buying things and sticking them in the ground.
Yeah.
In the landscape, unless you really have a long history and you have a plan, I wouldn't advise that. If you need that fix, and one of the topics we're going to cover before the end of the show is do it with planters.
Yeah, you can get
cram
that,
and
that
jam,
quick fix.
and you can throw anything in there. Get really creative, and then you can always portion those things out into the landscape when the next phase comes.
Mm-hmm. Or just start all over.
I don't want to sound cold-hearted, but you know they're living, breathing organisms. Plants are, but they reach their zenith in our landscape, and many people are they just can't pull the trigger on getting rid of stuff that needs to go.
Yeah.
You know, a juniper that's 20 years old, it's half dead. There's scraggly. You know that a young, vibrant juniper is not an expensive endeavor, and you can replace and replant. That should be part of the spring.
I'm guilty. I'm extremely guilty of that. And, you know, there's some guys I'm going to have to yank out here in the next couple of weeks that I'll have to get over that hump. And that's okay. You know, I'll have to do it, though.
You know, you can talk to somebody about that, and you just say, okay. You know,
You mean other than my psychologist?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's what I tell our clients. I'm looking at the trees from a practical standpoint. I don't have – it's not my property. I can tell you what's going to happen. I've had people chain themselves to trees that are on, you know, slotted to be removed. And I said, well, the tree's dead. You know, it's gone. And, yeah, even when we were talking, when Bob and I, he's talking about front end, being on the front end of things, we come in and look at the trees and say, okay, the footprint of the house is going to be here, and you want to preserve a box elder that's 4 feet away from the foundation? No, don't do it.
Yeah.
Take it now, put something in. If it's a 200-year-old oak, let's redesign or let's
work
move
around that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
That happens in the landscape architecture part with working with remodeling and construction of new homes, where we call those premium trees, where, okay, does the site drive the design or does the design drive the site?
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully in situations where if you have a 200-year-old oak or even 100, that there's some ways to work around some of those things. It pushes us in the design field to come up with some alternatives and not just the predictable.
Sure. You want to preserve that heritage. Mm-hmm. You want to preserve that beautiful piece of environmental sculpture is what it is.
And if there's situations where it's simply unavoidable, then what are we going to do to kind of soften the blow with that with that decision? If there's just not any accommodation. One thing I wanted to throw in here too, while Eric is with us, is the whole buckthorn.
Please.
And it's such a pretty screen.
Exactly. That's what triggered it, because if people say, "Oh, but I can't. It blocks me from the highway, and it does this and it does that," and it's like, is that because we're in the moment, or are we thinking about what's going to be 4 or 5 years from now or 10 years from now when the population of the buckthorn has eradicated or threatened all your high-value trees and your other things that you're trying to protect?
And your neighbor's trees,
right?
Because that's the thing.
There's a nasty
so terribly.
Story around what buckthorn's effects are. People don't realize that it has an incredible aggressive habit that it's much more long lasting than people think. So, Eric, tell people why we need to look at that in our assessment.
The property we're at today, we removed a dead elm by a pond, and it's surrounded by buckthorn. So you have tracks in there. the deer are just thick. It gives them a place to hide. As soon as the sun goes down, they come out and eat all the perennials and herbs you just planted. So, that's not the only reason for removing buckthorn. There were no maples. There were no oaks. There were no native trees coming up. There was just buckthorn, and that's the curse and the bad aspects of it.
It creates a monoculture when it finds and takes root.
Yeah, and there's people that believe it releases toxins. I'm not sure about all that sort of stuff, but I know as a company, we come in, we cut, we treat, we follow up, and some people are a little chemophobia, but you're better off to get rid of it once and for all than to toy with it. You could cut it off flush, and it'd be 4 feet tall by the end of the summer.
Yeah, they come back pretty aggressively. Yes, they do.
You've got 2 or 3 years of seeds to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we could speak a little bit about the treatment when you apply it to those fresh wounds, and they have to be fresh in order for the systemic.
They actually don't.
They don't?
Well, the stuff that we use and are licensed to use, you can paint right on you can apply it right to the bark and it'll kill it dead.
Mm-hmm. Does that have any effect on anything surrounding it if it's not directly in touch with it?
Yeah. If you applied it to your lawn, it would kill your lawn.
But if we were treating some buckthorns in a woods that had some young maple saplings coming up, would we have any concern about the buckthorn once it dies, or is there any transmittal of that through the root system?
Well, no, there shouldn't be.
Because I know people would. I'm thinking that because I did not know.
Like species, for instance, if you have a grove of oaks and one gets oak wilt, and they're like species.
Oh, yeah.
So if a red oak, you've got a grove of red oaks, and one gets it, it can move through the root system. Buckthorn is not going to bond with a maple root.
Got it.
Not an issue there.
Yeah,
okay.
when we treat, we never spray it on the ground because it will kill everything that it hits. That's what it's designed to do. So we paint it with a brush, wear the proper
it's very
clothing.
Focused.
Yeah, it's time consuming, but it's effective.
Yeah, it does the job. All right, very good.
There's stuff that the homeowner can buy over the counter that if they read the label and go online, it'll work. I think Fertilome makes some kind of a stump killer that'll work on buckthorn.
Fertilome.
Mm-hmm.
My friends, I want to bring this up. We've got about 8 minutes left on our show today. It's just whipped right by. This inaugural landscape and gardening show with Bob and BT. Name only temporary.
To be determined.
We're still waiting for those suggestions, so make sure you email us. I want to make sure we cover some lawn topics here. And then, excuse me, also a real quick spotlight. And we can bring some more of this stuff up next week, and we will. So let's not worry about putting too much time into it because we just have a few minutes here. But lawn topics and containers and spring planters. So let's dive into the lawn thing real quick here. And thanks for the insights on the buckthorn, by the way, because it's the time to get at it right now, too. So
anytime is a good time for buckthorn.
Get rid of it. What can we do? What can we do with the lawn at this point in time?
Well, we can do what I'm going to do when I leave here and get back home with my 5 sons. We're going to start doing a light raking.
Okay.
And removing that initial layer of debris.
Just plastic tines?
As it pertains to the lawn itself. You
Okay.
know, obviously, like we already mentioned about the beds and that kind of thing. And then, so it's mostly an aesthetic kind of thing at this point. So we're not getting into a lot of the other layers of lawn care yet this weekend. And I'll let Eric talk a little bit about those. But the other thing is, if you're having issues with your lawn and have for some time, and they're not related to the conditions of light or water, you might want to have a soil sample done.
Okay.
Before you start throwing things at the soil, why don't you get to know what the soil is about? What kind of soil do you have?
What are you going to need?
And that'll be really helpful for your things as far as your gardens and your production plants, the food production. So getting a scientific comfort level about what you're dealing with on site. And it varies. The metro is just so diverse in soil conditions, and with construction and all kinds of things going on, it's constantly changing. And we're moving, soils and compost and things in and out and all around. And there's some concerns about some of those too, depending on how they've been.
The quality of what you might be bringing
exactly.
in.
You could be bringing in diseases. So, but go ahead, Eric.
Well, the light rake, like we were talking about, people get all concerned about thatch and stuff, and I'm going to get in there and I'm going to rip
We're right here. We're right now. We're going at it.
Yeah, and then what you're doing is you're ripping tender roots and things like that that are an important part of the plant's physiology. So light rake will break up gray and pink snow mold, and once the grass starts to green up, people get antsy to put fertilizer and pre-emergent down.
Right.
Fertilizer, not so much a problem, but the earlier you put the pre-emergent down, the earlier it'll lose its effectiveness, and as the season wears on, you're going to get your crabgrass problems.
Right.
So if you can hold off on that.
Too soon for that.
Exactly.
When's the trigger time?
It's a moving target.
Okay.
Because it's really directed by the weather, right?
Exactly. I mean, some years it comes earlier, but crabgrass is a tough one to attack post-emergent wise. So if you can get your pre-emergent down and look at the websites and the blogs and things like that, and see when the general consensus is. It could be anywhere from mid to late May.
So is that kind of the consensus right now? Do you think?
It's been a while since I've been in the lawn care game, but I have my own turf, and everyone wants their yard to look good. So that's kind of the way I look at the lilacs. There's something wives' tale about that. So
When they start doing
when they bloom or
when they
something
bloom,
like that.
okay. How about you, Bob? What's your take on that? What do you think with the pre-emergence?
Well, it's related also to soil temperature as well. So the soil temperature is still quite cool. It's gonna, with this next cool down, is gonna kind of hold off at getting up into the 50s.
Yeah, we're gonna have
thing.
we're doing the show April 2nd. We're gonna have a stretch of relatively cool weather coming up.
But the actual soil temperature getting up into the
50s.
50s, it's still well below that now, 30s and 40s.
52, I think, is the magic number for.
Exactly.
Yeah, and the other thing is
soil temperature. 52,
exactly.
Yeah.
If you feel like you've got a thatchy lawn, like say you have very few trees and you get aeration's better than dethatching.
Okay.
Aerate, you can double aerate. You can go one direction and go back across the other way.
So rent that plugger if you can, or hire
aeration
the plugger,
is
hire
ideal.
the plugger people. Yeah.
Just go to the University of Minnesota Extension site, the www.extensionumn.edu. And you will see they list a couple sites on there that are tracking on a map that tells you when is the best time to start applying.
All right.
One is based out of the University of Michigan, the other one's out of Purdue, and they track the whole.
The soil temperature is what they're keeping an eye on as much as anything. Other factors, but probably that one, as you mentioned, the biggest one.
And the main thing when you're applying things like this is you immediately do have to water, like fertilizers and things like that, after you've applied them.
Okay.
They do need that water.
Yeah,
so.
it's got to soak its way in. But I like that nod that you put out there, Eric, that to get that plugging done, get that aeration done, because you'll loosen up that soil, you'll give those roots some room to expand. It'll give those holes in the ground for the fertilizer to make its way down into that root level a lot easier.
While you're bringing micronutrients back to the soil.
Back to the soil surface, yeah. Yeah.
One of the other things we'll talk about on one of our segments coming up will be the different types of lawn that we deal with. And there's some really low maintenance lawn options for us to look at. And some of them are being experimented with and implemented in certain settings. I know the park board's doing some things here in Minneapolis. And so that's something that we can talk about as well. Do we want basically some instances where it doesn't have to be looking like a golf course or super manicured, more of a no-mow lawn.
Sort of a natural look
right.
to it, yeah. Or a combination of the two.
It can be a combination. You could have both existing on a property, So there are some options there too, and then also just disease in general. How are we controlling disease? How are we taking the whole approach towards the fertilizing? People just get all worked up and excited about fertilizer. I just want, but
well, I got the tool. I got to use it.
That would be another hour show right there.
Yeah, and how what is appropriate and what is necessary versus overall health of the lawn is our goal.
Yeah,
and there's several approaches. Some are more foolproof than others, and some have been really researched, and there's a whole natural approach now that's much more desirable in high populated areas where we have runoff into lakes and things like that.
And we want to sort of mitigate as much of that as possible.
And when you do your cleanup, do not take all your debris and put it in the street.
No. Okay. Please do not do that. Put that.
You don't see the park board come over and dump everything on your lawn when they're cleaning it. So be respectful and get when you know they're going to do their cleaning, get yours done first. And then what's ever left in the street, they take it. Yours is done, and it's not blowing back, and reversing your work.
It's always easy to put it in those heavy-duty bags and make your way off to the compost site, which is a treat to do.
Right.
We're going to continue the conversation at the top of the show next week with containers and spring planters. Because, gentlemen, we've clocked an hour on the Landscape and Gardening Show with Bob and BT here on the Alive and Social Network, a full hour of topics, and we'll bring you a full hour next week. Eric Melby from Meridian Tree Experts, thank you so much for joining us. What a real treat to have you here. Come join us again during the course of the run of the show, won't you, please?
My pleasure.
I have worked with Eric over the years and very impressed with his knowledge and his care, and his staff, also knowledgeable. My clients are very satisfied with his work. And it's an ongoing process as some of these properties, there's so much need, and it's a good working relationship because he understands what my purposes are. That's the whole front end, the planning and so forth, the why.
Yeah.
We have to know the why before we do the how.
Learn more about Bob Harvey's work at Edelweiss Design, Edelweiss Design. Did I do it right?
Yes, you
did. Yes,
did.
I did. EdelweissDesign.com. I'm Brian Turner. There's Bob Harvey.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining in on the Landscape and Gardening Show with Bob and BT here on the Alive and Social Network. We'll see you next week.
Happy Easter.